We've been going through the book of Judges. I have a gift for you if you haven't picked one up. It's actually from the church, so it's not a gift from me, okay? The church is a gift for you. These little books right here are just a copy of the book of Judges. So it's the same book of Judges that you have in your Bible. It's just taken out and bound together, and it has a little spot for you to put notes. This is what I'll be saying today right here. But it has a little spot for you to take notes, and then you can keep it. So we have a couple up here, and there's some in the back as well. So if you didn't get one when you came in, and you haven't picked one up over the course of the last, 2.5 months or so, go grab one on your way out, and you can bring it back next week because I'll be in the book of Judges for the next 11 chapters, okay? So we'll be there until that's done. So we have several more weeks in there. So feel free to grab one, even if you're just a visitor. You're like, I don't know if I'm ever going to come back here. Just take it, and you can enjoy it. You can study Judges on your own and take notes there, okay? So that's something for you to do. So we're in the book of Judges, chapter 8. If you have your Bibles, you can open to the end of Judges 8. What we've gotten through to this point is we've seen the cycle of the Judges played out several times, okay? The cycle, just to explain it to you, goes like this. Israel does well. That's God's people, does well. Then they begin to worship the gods of their neighbors, which makes God angry. And then they get put into some sort of slavery, servitude, oppression by a foreign king. And then they cry out to God and say, God, save us from these oppressors. And then God raises up a deliverer, which is called a judge. And the judge delivers them from those oppressors. And then they're back to doing pretty well. And then they do it again and again and again and again. This is the story of the book of Judges over and over and over again. Today, though, we're going to zoom in at the very end of the Gideon cycle. So Gideon has delivered the people from Midian. He was raised up by God, and through the power of God, was able to drive out the Midianites, who were a particularly annoying oppressor. What the Midianites would do is they would travel from community to community over the course of the year and eat all of their food. And so they would just show up in your neighborhood, and they'd have armies with them, and they'd say, hey, we're eating all of your food. And you're like, well, that's what I was planning on feeding my family. And they're like, well, I guess we're family. We're eating your food. And then once they ate all your food, they would pick up their stuff, and they'd go to the next town, and they'd do it again and again and again. And they did this for a series of years, which drove Israel to hiding into caves and trying to disguise where their food was because they were tired of getting captured and all their food taken from them. So it's a really, really tough season. And then God raises up this Gideon figure. And Gideon's a coward, but God sees something in him that he can use. And he says, I'm going to use you to be a mighty man of valor. And Gideon says, okay, I guess you're going to use me then, Lord. And God says, okay, raise an army up, Gideon, and go and fight them. So Gideon raises an army of 30,000 men. And he goes down, and he's going to fight the Midianites. And God looked at the army, and he said, that is too many people. We need to get this army down to a smaller size. So tell everyone who doesn't want to fight, who's scared to fight, go home. And 20,000 of those men turn around, leave. And it's like, okay, God, is this small enough? And God's like, not small enough yet. Let's go find another way. So he eventually whittles the army down to 300 men plus Gideon to fight the massive army of Midian. This is supposed to be a defeat, but God says, I am going to drive your number so small, so few, that you'll have no one to credit with victory except for me. Because God says, I want to get the glory for the fight. And Gideon's like, that's fine, Lord. Sure enough, the fight happens. The Midianites basically kill each other in confusion. And then the Israelites just kind of do a little mop-up duty. Gideon ultimately kills the two kings of Midian. And life moves on. But the people are so thankful to Gideon that we get the interaction that we're going to see today. And what we're going to look at today is this is not a positive sermon. A lot of Sundays you come in here, and I want to give you good news to talk about how you're a good person. This is not often, right? But I want to give you good news, maybe something that you can go home, I can put this to work. This is the opposite of that. So this is going to be a negative sermon with negative application. If you want to have positive application, add the word don't to everything that I say, and then you can have positive application, okay? But it's going to be a fairly negative sermon. I'm aware of that. The title of this sermon is How to Ruin Your Legacy, okay? That's the title of your sermon, okay? So how to ruin your legacy. So we all think about our legacy, or we should think about our legacy. What are we going to leave behind, the generations behind us, our kids and our grandkids and our great-grandkids, the community that we live in? What's going to be left behind when we are no longer here, right? And you may have good dreams for what that's going to be. I hope you do, that your kids will love the Lord, that they'll be faithful in what they do. They'll be successful at what they put their hands to. They'll be generous and kind and generally good-hearted people who have a passion to follow Jesus Christ. What a wonderful legacy that would be. But that's not the legacy we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how to take that good legacy, corrupt it, and turn it into something absolutely useless for future generations. Because that's what Gideon did at the end of his life. You know, the Old Testament is replete, just consistent with stories of men who live godly lives for a season and then ruin it at the end. Absolutely ruining the entire taste of their life at the end. When I was a kid, I had the Adventure Bible. They still make this Bible for kids, an Adventure Bible. I don't know if all of the extra, additional, stuff has changed from whenever I was a kid. Probably has. But they had glossy pages inside of my Adventure Bible. And I can remember as a child looking through my Bible, and you kind of got the Bible pages, which you're supposed to read, and then you got the glossy pages, which you want to read. And so I'd always go to the glossy pages that weren't actually the Bible, and they had a 3-page list of the kings of Israel and Judah. 3 pages, and it was all these names of people that I didn't know anything about. And it would say, here's the king's name, here's kind of what he did, where he's in the Bible, and then it would categorize the king as good, mostly bad, or extremely bad, or something like that. And that's the way they were categorized, and I always loved that. I was like, look at it. But what always shocked me as a kid, and even now a little bit as an adult, how many of those people are mostly something? Right? They're not good all the way to the end. They're mostly something, and that's usually because the end of their life, they messed it up. Some of you today are approaching the end of your life. I don't know when that's going to be. I'm not prophetically announcing that on you. I'm just saying, based on the actuary tables, you're getting near the end, okay? You can see the finish line. You're thinking about that finish. Man, I want to encourage you to finish strong, because how you finish your life, how you conclude what you do, impacts generations to come after you more than you know. And so this is what they say, Judges chapter 8, verse 22. It says, "Then the Israelites said to Gideon, 'Rule over us, you as well as your sons and your grandsons, for you deliver us from the power of Midian.' But Gideon said to them, 'I will not rule over you, and my sons will not rule over you. The Lord will rule over you.'" And right now, you're thinking, Matt, I thought you said he was going to be a negative example. Look how good he's doing. They basically said, we want to make you and your descendants kings. And he said, no, the Lord will rule over you. Like, what a good dude he is. And it looks that way at first glance. In fact, the first time I read it, I was like, hey, good job, Gideon. And then I read the next 4 verses. I was like, what the heck, Gideon? What happened between what you said here and what you did literally right below here? What happened to you? But there's a hint inside of this that shows what was going on inside of Gideon. Right? The people say, look, we want you and your kids to rule over us. Why do we want you to do that? Because you delivered us from the power of Midian. Here's the secret, though, guys. Gideon knew this, and they knew this. Gideon did not deliver them from the power of Midian. He did not. Intentionally, God reduced Gideon's army down to almost nothing, so no one would be confused about who delivered Israel from the hand of Midian. God himself delivered Israel from the hand of Midian. And the people have forgotten that, and they go to Gideon, and they're like, oh my goodness, you're such a good warrior. You're so powerful. Rule over us, because look at what you did. And Gideon did not, at that moment, speak a corrective to them. He did not say, hey guys, I did not deliver you. The Lord delivered you from the hand of Midian. Therefore, I will not rule over you. The Lord will rule over you. No, he didn't say that. He kind of gave like lip service to the idea that, no, I shouldn't be your king. I shouldn't rule over you. But he never once corrected when they gave God's glory to him. You want to ruin your legacy? Three easy steps to ruining your legacy, okay? Just three nice, easy, compact steps to ruin your legacy. First step is this. Take credit for what God has done in your life. Right? What God has done in your life, what the Lord has done, you start taking credit for. Right? Deny credit to God. Take the credit when people give it to you. Forget what God has done and take all the credit for yourself. That's what Gideon did. In that moment, when people started praising him, he said, yeah, that sounds about how I remember it too. And at the end of our lives, when we begin to tell our stories, when we begin to be, I've heard so many wonderful stories from people about, what they've done, where they've been, businesses they've started, ventures they've done. Man, I think, boy, some of y'all have lived some lives. There's a guy at my last church, wonderful man, loved the Lord. And if you started telling stories, he grew up out in Tennessee area out there. And man, he ran into like moonshiners and ate chicken with Colonel Sanders, literally with Colonel Sanders, ate chicken at his house, ended up at some like small private concert with Elvis, I think. Like you start hearing his stories and you're like, I don't know, I sat 4 rows away from Matthew McConaughey at a baseball game once. And my wife thinks that's huge news, by the way. A little too much, I might add. She's excited by her proximity to another Matt out there. Spoiler alert, by the way, his name doesn't mean much to generations much after mine. She was bragging about that to some teenage girls a decade ago, and they're like, who? Who's this guy? I don't even know who that is. And she's like, you guys are so dumb. I think did you touch him? Did you reach out and touch him? Did you touch the hem of his garment, Danielle, when he came by? I know you tried. Right? So, but I hear the stories sometimes. Some of y'all have lived such tremendous lives. And I mean, you've been through like the years. You've seen amazing things. You've been a part of amazing things, right? And when you begin to tell your stories, which you should tell those stories, we need to hear those stories. Do not take credit for what the Lord has done. Your story is important. It matters. It should be shared. We need to hear it. But don't take credit for what the Lord has done. Right? Give God credit in the midst of the story that you weave. Right? It keeps us grounded there. You want to ruin your legacy, though? Man, take all the credit. Yeah, and then I did this, and I built this, and I was successful with this. And when all of your stories have the subject as you are in a perfect place to ruin your legacy. Because what you're leaving behind is not a legacy of faith, not a legacy of hope for something greater. It's that you were something great. Gideon fell prey to this. And sure, he gave lip service to the right thing. Oh, I won't be your king. But man, his actions were the exact opposite of that. Continuing on, verse 24. Then Gideon said to them, let me make a request of you. Everyone give me an earring from his plunder. Now the enemy had gold earrings because they were Ishmaelites. And they said, we agree to give them. So they spread out a cloak and everyone threw an earring from his plunder onto it. And the weight of the gold earrings he requested was 43 pounds of gold. Right? Man, that's a lot. In addition to the crescent ornaments and ear pendants and purple garments that he took from the kings of Midian and the chains on the necks of their camels. Gideon then made an ephod from all of this and put it in Ophrah, his hometown, and all the Israelites prostituted themselves by worshiping it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and his household. Now Gideon says, I don't want to be a king. I don't want to be your leader. I don't want to be your ruler. And then immediately after that, he's like, but I will take a king's ransom if that's all well and good with y'all. Like, I'm not your king. I'm not your ruler. But I'll take 43 pounds of gold from the plunder to begin with. So like his heart immediately, it's like the next verse, immediately you're like, something's off with Gideon right now. Like something's really off with this man. And what he does, he takes that gold and he takes the gold that he had taken from the king's camels and stuff. and he melts it down, and he makes something called an ephod. And if you're not really like Old Testament aware, you're like, I don't know what that is. That's cool. That's wonderful. Good for you. That's why I'm here today, okay, guys? What that was a very special vest garment that the priest wore. And it had a spot for 12 precious stones, one for each of the tribes of Israel. And the priest would wear that when ministering inside of like the holy place. When he was on duty, that's what he wore. And inside of it was a special little pouch that he kept the Urim and the Thummim, which were basically a way for him to divine God's will. Kind of like dice, casting lots out there. And so Gideon, who said, I will not be your king, developed an alternative form of the priesthood that took place at his house. Now, this was expressly forbidden. Like God, some of you are like, well, I don't really know why that's such a big deal. Like, read the first 5 books of the Bible. You'll read a lot about this garment and about how it's only supposed to be used by these people, from these families. One person's supposed to have it, and Gideon is not that person. Gideon knew what he was doing. He understood what he was doing. He just said, I don't care anymore. Second way to ruin your legacy. It's a wonderful thing. You all who want to leave a legacy of faith behind you. Second way, after taking credit for what God has done away from God and giving it to yourself, the second way is this: compromise on all of your religious beliefs as you get older. Just start compromising on whatever it is that you've believed your whole life. Right? You say, we may grow in knowledge. You may grow in knowledge. I pray you do grow in knowledge as you get older and you get a little wise, you get a little more discerning. But compromise in areas where God has very clearly instructed you what to say and what not to say. Right? Gideon knew for a fact he should not have done this. He just did not care. He thought, man, God has used me for such powerful things. I guess I deserve to have people come to me and ask me for God's will and, come and practice worship in the wrong spot. And most of us, I hope, are not going to form an alternative religion in our later days. You're not just going to come up with some brand new revelation, and start some whole new cult out of your thing. Although, Seth kind of made this sound like a cult, by the way. He's like, hey, fill out the visitor card so we can suck you into our thing. I don't know if that's exactly the announcement we want to make there, right? We would love to get a record of your visit, but maybe not to suck them into the thing, right? Right? But most of us aren't going to come up with some brand new cult. What we do see, though, and what you've probably seen in a variety of places in your life, and I know I've seen it, that people began to compromise on things that they never should have. I have books written by people in my office who are theologically just solid, rock solid in what they believe. You read it and you're like, man, this is good. I can use this. I can share this with people. And then all of a sudden you watch them now and you're like, ooh, yeah. I have a shelf. It's the lower right-hand shelf in my office. And it's basically what I put down there was books that might get me fired. These are books that are either borderline heresy on their own, or their authors have jumped full on into heresy. And so you slowly get relegated down into the bottom right corner of my office. It's not that what you wrote was bad 15, 20 years ago. It's that what you preach now doesn't match what you said then. And the legacy of faith is compromised. I've seen people, and they raise their kids in church. Say, man, we're going to raise our kids in church. We're going to get our kids into church. And then their kids get out of the house, and then they disappear. And you think, this was a huge deal for you. Your whole life, you were here morning, noon, night. You were here all the time at the church showing this. And as soon as your kids are no longer underneath your roof, you're like, I'm out. I served my time. This is me time now. I've seen it. Right? By the way, that was also, it's not directly connected to what I want to say, but I'll mention it anyways. It's a prime time for divorce to happen, right? We stay together for the kids. We kind of put on this show. Now the kids are gone. Now we can go out and do our own thing. That's the end of your life. Legacy matters. But if it's true, if you believed what you said you believed your whole life, you wouldn't abandon your faith. You wouldn't abandon your church community. You wouldn't abandon the body of Christ just because the people who you were trying to mentor for the next generation have moved on, right? You'd stay committed and invest in the people who are still having the next generation. But we got a lot of people having the next generation of kids around us right now. Good job, all of you mamas out there bringing the next generation of kids into this world. Yes, good job. Yeah, high five, Maggie. Good job. You've done your job, okay? Slow down. Right? So you want to wreck your legacy? You want to leave a mess behind you instead of a legacy of faith behind you? Man, take credit for what God has done and just take all that credit. And then begin to compromise what you believe. Whether it's truth claims where you're like, well, I kind of used to believe that, but now I've grown in my knowledge. Or whether it's, just you've given up on the fellowship of the believer. Be careful about those things. Because your kids have moved on. I moved out of my parents' house. I remember this. When I got married at 19 years old, and my parents, they stopped going to the church that I grew up in. And they had some issues with the church, and there was whatever. It doesn't really matter why they left the church. But I remember watching them from afar because I was still active in that church and thinking, where the heck are they going? My mom and dad who raised me in the church, where are they going and why aren't they going like they used to go? Right? What happened to my parents? And then they moved to Wisconsin, which is not the easiest place to have an evangelical witness. That's why we do Annie Armstrong offering to help plant churches out there. And they struggled to find a church there. And now, fast forward to today, and they're fully involved in their church out in Malakoff and serving faithfully. And I'm like, oh, praise God for that they're investing themselves back into the thing that I thought my whole life was central to who they were. But they struggled. After I moved out, youngest child, after I moved out, they struggled finding their way. I'm not saying it won't be hard. I'm not saying that you won't have some second guessing you need to do, or maybe you need to evaluate where you're at or what you're doing. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying if you want to wreck your legacy, your kids are still watching what you do. Just compromise on what you used to say you believe. Right? That'll add enough confusion for them. The Gideon and his family became kind of like these priests in Orpha, beginning a whole new wayward religion. So, verse 28, Gideon was subdued before the Israelites. They were no longer a threat. And the land had peace for 40 years during the days of Gideon. That sounds good. Jerubbaal, that's Gideon's other name, the son of Joash, went back to live at his house, and he had 70 sons, his own offspring, since he had many wives. His concubine, who was in Shechem, also bore him a son, and he named him Abimelech. And then Gideon, son of Joash, died at a good old age, was buried in the tomb of his father Joash in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. Okay, so what's the third step in ruining our legacy? Matt, I understand. I'm really into ruining my legacy today, so I'm working hard at this. How am I gonna finish destroying my legacy? What's the best way to do it, okay? Here's what you need to do, okay? Just sin as flagrantly as you can. Right? He had 70 sons. No mention of how many daughters he has, but I would imagine it was more than 0. Right? 70 sons, his own flesh and blood. How do you get 70 sons, your own flesh and blood? Well, the next part of the voice says he had many wives. He had many wives. And so what he did was he multiplied wives around and practiced polygamy, had as many women as he could handle, and was having kids with as many of them as he can have. And by the way, just in case you're wondering, that's not right. Right? It's not right. I don't know if we need to come out strong against polygamy today, but I will. It's not the way God intended it to be. Right? Well, I see it all throughout the Old Testament. All these guys are doing it. They're all wrong. All of them are wrong. Every time it happens, it creates a mess. Every time you see some leader out there with 5 wives in the Bible, they're making a mess of themselves. David made a mess of himself. Solomon made a mess of himself. 1 wife for life makes life a lot easier. And 1 is sometimes too many. Not for me, babe. Not for me. But 1. 1. 1 wife for life. And you're like, well, that's so restrictive. And what about divorce? What about all that stuff? I'm not getting into those things. I'm just saying, let's if you got 2 at a time, you definitely are doing it wrong. Okay? We can just firmly state you're wrong there. Okay? and then we can work on some more individual cases, case by case. But Gideon had enough wives to have 70 sons, and then he had this other woman who wasn't even his wife he's having kids with, which I doubt is the only one of those he's got. It's called a concubine, which basically is just a baby mama, basically just a woman that he had to go and have babies with, because apparently whoever he was married to couldn't satisfy him with all of these. They were probably all pregnant, honestly. That's probably what happened. And so he's like, I got to get another woman. And so he goes down to Shechem. He finds himself a nice girl. And she says, will you marry me like you did all these other women? He's like, nah, commitment's too much for me. How about we just kind of like make this a contract agreement, and we kind of do a concubine relationship. She's like, cool. And he has a kid with this kid, and this kid gets a name. You know, there's 70 sons. We only know the name of one right now, before, who was in the previous little section, who's Jether, his oldest son. We don't know anything about the next 69 sons, but this kid gets a name, Abimelech. Why does he get a name? Because he's going to matter next week. We're going to talk a lot about Abimelech next week. But here's the cool thing about Abimelech, the son of the concubine of the man who said he would not be the king. You know what his name means? Ab means father, right? Abba, father. Some of you know that. Melech means king. What his name literally means is my dad is king. He's like, no, I won't be your king. I won't be your king. 70 kids in a little like, my terminology there is all borderline obscene. 70 kids and an illegitimate son later. That's a better term. But there it is, illegitimate son later. 70 kids and an illegitimate son later, and he's like, I don't know, I've run out of names, but I am a king. I want everyone to know when they see this kid. And they're like, who's your dad? And he's like, my dad, he's the king up there. Right? Gideon verbally rejected like kingship, leadership, but inside of his heart was all about that. You know, one of the warnings that the Old Testament gives prior to this, the Torah gives about getting a king. Like they're expressly said, you should not get a king, because when you get a king, they're going to multiply their horses, which is weird, and their wives. They're going to take your wives to be their wives, and that's exactly what Gideon did. He acted like a king in all ways, and eventually he names his son, my dad is the king. Abimelech struggled with sin at the end of his life. You want to wreck your legacy? Man, jump headlong into sin and pride. Just give up on the guardrails that you put around you. Give up on holy living. Stop even pretending that you're going to do this thing right, and just do whatever it is that pleases you today. Whatever it is that pleases you today, do those things. And you read the account here, and it's kind of neutral sounding. Like the land had rest, that's good. And things were okay while Gideon was there, that's good. And you're like, well, maybe, Matt, you're being too hard on Gideon. Right? Maybe you're just being too hard on him. I said it was 3 steps to ruin your legacy, right? Step 1, take credit for what God has done. Step 2, right, compromise on what you believe religiously. Begin to compromise yourself in your faith. Step 3, jump headlong into sin without any care about holiness. There's technically a 4th step, because your legacy isn't really defined until step 4 happens. But it's going to happen either way, and it's to die. Okay, that's step 4. We'll read about that right now. When Gideon died, verse 33, when Gideon died, the Israelites turned and prostituted themselves by worshiping the Baals and made Baal-berith their god. The Israelites did not remember the Lord their God, who had rescued them from the hand of their enemies around them. They did not show kindness to the house of Jeroboam, that's Gideon, for the good, all the good that he had done for Israel. The end of the story, you want to wreck your legacy, you want to fully entrench your legacy after you've done those other things, okay? Just die and then watch the carnage that happens right afterwards. I mean, it wasn't years after Gideon died that they turned to worshiping idols. It's like immediately. Gideon died, Israel turned to the Baals. They made Baal-berith their god. As soon as he died, the generations after him, the people who revered him, the people who admired him, the people who had gone to his house to get the will of God from his little ephod that he had built for himself, right? All of them, as Gideon's dead, okay, where's the next God that we can serve. I know Gideon wrecked his legacy because it's immediate right there. Right? My fear in my life, one of a handful of fears that I have, right, is what will be left after I'm gone. Here, first, I was walking up here yesterday afternoon, and I don't often get like sentimental or whatever, but I was coming up the walkway, and the lawn guys had just been out and mowed the lawn. Everything looked real nice, and the sun was beginning to go down. I thought, man, Lord, thank you. Like, for the generations that were here, this place, before I ever knew about it. Because, I mean, we got nice buildings, we got wonderful facilities, none of it which was built by me. Man, Lord, you're just so faithful to give generations out there. Thank you. But what a legacy. Like, some of your parents or grandparents or some of you have been here long enough that you're a part of that legacy, right? You predate this building or that building, right? You're a part of that. What a legacy that leaves. But I worry sometimes, what am I going to leave behind at where I work, First Baptist Church Rockdale? What am I going to leave behind in my family, with my kids, with my grandkids one day, not soon, my grandkids? What am I going to leave behind? What is there going to be after me? And then I read the story of a guy like Gideon, who did so much well and was used by God to do wonderful things. And then at the end, it was basically useless. You know, I was told a couple weeks ago, they said, man, I'm getting tired of the book of Judges. It's the same thing over and over and over again. And I feel it sometimes. I'm with you sometimes. I love the book of Judges, to be fair. Man, it's the same thing over and over again. But, you know, that's sort of the point. These guys come out of nowhere. God raises them up to do great things, and then fast forward 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, at the end of their life, it's like they never were here. You know, it's a grain of sand thrown into the ocean. It doesn't raise the water at all. Nothing's better because they were here. I don't want that to be my story. It doesn't have to be massive. It doesn't have to be, you know, generations, you know, oh, Matt was such a blah, blah. No, just faithful children, faithful grandchildren, right? Maybe some of y'all being formed in the likeness of God through my witness here. Just small things that have generational effects out from here. And I look at Gideon as a cautionary tale for me to say, man, it's be careful what you do. If you want to wreck your legacy, I mean, if you really want to wreck your legacy, it's not hard. I'd go as far as to say it's really easy to do. Just serve yourself for a couple years of your life. And all the good that you did, 70, 80 years of good, can be washed away in 6 glorious minutes of terror. I don't want that to be my story. I hope that you don't want that to be your story as well. So what do we do? Where is the positive hope here? The positive hope is this, right? Like if we cling to Jesus, if we abide in the vine to the very end, and if we hold firm to the end, right, there are blessings unspeakable, and the generations after you will have testimonies of faith to share. Guys, we can do this. But you do need to be cautious. If you're an older saint in here today, I want to encourage you to finish strong. Don't quit. Don't stop. Don't say, I've done my time. Finish strong. The race is laid before you. Finish that race. And yeah, it's hard. And yeah, things around you may look different than what you would have expected them to be. Finish strong. Finish faithfully. There'll be a legacy after you. I've shared before, there was a man at my church in Richmond that I was at. And he had MS. It's a terrible disease. Truly, it just wears the body out. And I remember him coming faithfully, in pain, in absolute agony, dragging himself to church. And I looked at him and I thought, there's a man who's leading a legacy of faith after him. Oh, if that were true of us. But you can't have a legacy of faith unless you begin a relationship with Jesus Christ. So if you're here today and you don't know Jesus as your Savior and Lord, guys, don't think about your legacy because it's not going to matter if you don't have life eternal in Christ Jesus. Christ died for you even though you were a sinner. He loves you enough to send his son to die on the cross, to buy your salvation. And if you would believe in him, you'd have life eternal. You start there. So if you don't know Jesus today, we're going to have an invitation. You can start there today. If you do know Jesus, though, I want you to think. Are you wrecking your legacy already? Are you already taking God's glory? Are you already diving headlong into sin? Right? Are you already living a life that compromises what you believe, what you say you believe? And if you are, repentance is your path forward. Let me pray.